My name is Pascal Montgomery. I'm 32 years old, and I never thought I'd see my father's face twist with such disgust over a birthday gift. Only $200? Dad scoffed, waving the gift card like it was a parking ticket. The room fell silent as everyone stared. Little did he know that same morning, I had authorized another $5,600 payment for Mom's medical bills from my backup account. It's funny how the smallest gestures can reveal the biggest truths about the people we call family. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you've ever had your generosity thrown back in your face, hit that like button and subscribe to join others who understand that sometimes the most expensive gift is loyalty. I was always the responsible one in our family. As the eldest child, I learned early on that making my parents proud meant meeting expectations, sometimes at my own expense. My father, Marcus Montgomery, worked as a mid-level manager at a manufacturing plant for 30 years. He was the type of man who measured success in dollar signs and status symbols. Mom, Beatrice, was softer around the edges, a part-time elementary school aide who somehow made our modest upbringing feel rich with little touches of care and creativity. My sister Paige came along 4 years after me. While I inherited Dad's practical mindset with Mom's compassion, Paige got Dad's ambition paired with his quick temper. Growing up, our dynamic was predictable. I would work quietly to achieve. Paige would demand attention for her accomplishments, and somehow, her style always seemed to win more visible approval. We weren't poor during my childhood, but we weren't comfortable either. I remember the hushed arguments about bills behind closed doors. I remember Mom patching my jeans instead of buying new ones, and Dad working overtime on weekends. Despite the financial stress, there was warmth in our home back then, especially from Mom, who could transform macaroni and cheese into what felt like a feast with just a few extra spices and a made-up story about the special occasion we were celebrating. When I turned 18, I opted for a state college with a scholarship rather than the prestigious private schools that would have drained our family finances. I studied computer science, worked part-time throughout, and graduated with minimal debt. Paige, on the other hand, insisted on an expensive private university when her time came, resulting in substantial loans that somehow became a shared family burden. My career in software development took off faster than I expected. By 26, I was earning 6 figures at a respected tech firm, creating financial security I'd never known. I started helping my parents with small things at first, covering dinner when we went out, buying thoughtful gifts for birthdays and Christmas. Nothing extravagant, but comfortable. The dynamics shifted subtly when my income surpassed my father's. There was pride in his voice when he told his friends about my job, but also a sharp edge of something else. Resentment, perhaps. Competition, maybe. Everything changed 3 years ago when Mom started experiencing unusual fatigue, unexplained weight loss, and recurring infections. After months of tests and specialists, the diagnosis came. A rare autoimmune disorder complicated by early-onset kidney disease. The medical bills started rolling in immediately, overwhelming even with insurance. I still remember Dad sitting at the kitchen table, head in hands, surrounded by papers with increasingly alarming numbers. Without hesitation, I stepped in, first with a lump sum to clear the immediate bills, then with a systematic plan. I created a separate account dedicated solely to Mom's medical expenses, setting up automatic payments for her ongoing treatments, medications, and the occasional emergency room visit. The monthly total averaged around $5,600, sometimes more when complications arose. I never told them the exact amount, just assured them I had it covered. Dad's reaction was complicated. There was relief, certainly, but also a wounded pride that festered over time. He would make comments about temporary help and how he'd pay me back eventually, even though we both knew that was unlikely. Paige's response was even more troubling. Instead of gratitude for the burden I'd taken off the family, she seemed to interpret my financial support as some sort of power play, a way to make myself look good while making them feel small. As Mom's condition required more care, we made the decision to move in together to share responsibilities. I found a spacious 4-bedroom rental house in a quiet neighborhood, close to Mom's medical facilities. The rent was steep, $3,200 monthly, with me covering 2/3, while Dad and Paige split the remainder. This arrangement made sense practically, but created an uncomfortable dynamic where my family sometimes felt more like roommates with grudges than loved ones. Despite the tension, I held on to hope that my contributions would eventually be recognized as what they were: acts of love, not obligation or showing off. I expected basic appreciation, maybe not daily thank yous, but at least acknowledgement of the financial reality. Instead, the more I gave, the more it seemed to be taken for granted, absorbed into a new normal where my role was provider without recognition. Mom was the only one who seemed truly grateful, though her declining health meant she often didn't have the energy to mediate family disputes. She would squeeze my hand when I helped her to doctor appointments, whisper thank yous when I brought her medications, and sometimes I'd catch her watching me with eyes full of a mother's worry. Not for herself, but for me. I convinced myself that family meant sacrifice, that love wasn't about recognition. But as Dad's 60th birthday approached, something in me still yearned for that moment of connection, that acknowledgement that my efforts mattered. I wanted to give him something meaningful, something that would bridge the growing distance between us. I had no idea how catastrophically that gesture would backfire. I spent weeks planning Dad's 60th birthday celebration. Despite our strained relationship, I wanted to mark the milestone properly. I reserved a private room at Sullivan's Steakhouse, his favorite restaurant that we normally considered too expensive for regular visits. I coordinated with his friends from work, his bowling league, and even tracked down a couple of his old college roommates who lived a few states away. The guest list reached 20 people, all expenses covered by me, though I let everyone believe it was a group effort. For the actual gift, I deliberated for days. Dad wasn't sentimental about objects, and he already had the practical items he needed. What he valued was freedom, choices, opportunities to do what he wanted. That's when I landed on the $200 gift card to Martin's Fishing Supply. It wasn't just any store. It was where he bought his very first professional-grade fishing rod when I was 10 years old. That fishing trip held special significance for both of us. It was a rare, perfect day on Lake Champlain, just the two of us in a rented boat. Dad had been unusually relaxed, patient with my amateur casting attempts, genuinely happy when I caught a modest-sized bass. We talked about real things that day: his hopes for retirement someday, his regrets about working so many weekends during my childhood. He pointed to other men with expensive boats and top-of-the-line gear and said, "That stuff doesn't make the fish bite any better. It's about the time you spend, the skills you develop." It was one of the few times I felt completely connected to him, man to man rather than child to authority figure. The gift card came with a handwritten note reminding him of that day, suggesting we plan another trip now that he was entering his 60s. I'd already researched guided fishing expeditions that could accommodate Mom's mobility issues so she could join us. The $200 was meant as a starting point, a symbolic amount to get him thinking about the bigger experience I wanted to give him. The evening of the party started well. Dad seemed genuinely surprised by the gathering, especially when he saw his old college friends. The restaurant had executed everything perfectly, from the reserved parking space to the custom menu featuring all his favorites. Mom was having a good day, health-wise, dressed in a new outfit I'd helped her shop for, her smile bright, despite the slight tremor in her hands. After dinner, as everyone lingered over coffee and bourbon, I signaled for the gift presentation. Various friends presented their offerings, mostly bottles of premium whiskey, golf accessories, and humorous cards about getting older. Dad received each with appropriate appreciation, laughing at the jokes, admiring the thoughtfulness. When my turn came, I handed him the small envelope with the gift card and note. His expression shifted as soon as he opened it. A flash of disappointment quickly hardened into something colder. "Only $200? He said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "That's your big gift? A gift card?" The room didn't exactly fall silent, But conversations dimmed as attention shifted to our exchange. My chest tightened, the practiced explanation about the significance dying in my throat. I thought. I started. "I know what you make, Pascal," he interrupted. "Bill here got me a $300 scotch, and he's on a fixed income." He gestured to his former coworker who looked deeply uncomfortable. "My own son can't do better than a gift card to a bait shop." "Marcus," Mom said softly, placing her hand on his arm. "It's a thoughtful gift." "It's thoughtless," he countered. "Look at this place. Look at this party." Then he gives me pocket change as an afterthought. Paige, who had contributed exactly nothing to the evening's arrangements, jumped in. "Dad's right. It seems kind of cheap considering, everything." The way she emphasized everything made it clear she was referring to my income, not the effort I'd put into the celebration. "Did you even read the note?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. "It's about planning a trip together, about that day on Lake Champlain." Dad glanced at the note he'd barely skimmed, then folded it and tucked it into his pocket without reading. "If you wanted to plan a trip, you should have just done it instead of making me shop for my own gift." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced smiles and premature goodbyes. I made excuses to guests, thanked them for coming, assured them everything was fine, just a small misunderstanding. Inside, I felt hollow, a familiar emptiness expanding where hope had briefly lived. Later that night, after we'd returned home, and most of the tension had been buried under layers of polite avoidance, Paige cornered me in the kitchen. "You embarrassed him," she said, arms crossed defensively. "You could have at least matched what his friends gave him." "I spent over $2,000 on the party," I replied, keeping my voice low to avoid waking Mom, who had finally fallen asleep after the emotional evening. The gift card was symbolic. "Everything with you is about money," she shot back. "Always keeping score, making sure we know how much you contribute." The irony was so absurd I almost laughed. I've never once mentioned how much I pay for anything. You don't have to. The way you live, the way you swoop in to save us, it's all about making yourself feel superior. Dad appeared in the doorway, apparently having overheard. "She's right, Pascal. You think your money makes you better than us. More responsible, more successful." "That's not true," I protested, though part of me wondered if there was a kernel of truth there. Did I secretly enjoy being the capable one, the provider? "I'm just trying to help the family." "We didn't ask for your help," Dad said, the words landing like physical blows. "We were managing fine before you decided to play hero." I looked between them, searching for any sign of the gratitude I'd convinced myself lay beneath their pride. There was none, just resentment, and something worse, a dismissal of not just my contributions, but my intentions. "I see," I said finally, the words inadequate to express the hollowing out I felt inside. As I turned to leave the kitchen, I caught a glimpse of Mom standing in the hallway, her face a mask of sorrow. She had heard everything, but said nothing, caught between loyalty to her husband and recognition of the truth. Her silence hurt more than Dad's words. I went to bed that night wondering how giving everything could feel so much like losing everything. The $200 gift card sat on my dresser, returned to me without ceremony, the note still unread. 3 days after the birthday disaster, I came home early from work, exhausted from juggling project deadlines and an emergency call with Mom's specialist about adjusting her medication. The house was quiet, unusual for mid-afternoon, when Dad typically had sports blaring on the living room TV. I assumed everyone was out until I heard muffled voices coming from the dining room, the tone serious and conspiratorial. I paused in the hallway, not intending to eavesdrop but caught by the mention of my name. "Pascal doesn't need to know yet," Paige was saying. "Not until we've figured out the logistics." "It's his house too," Mom's voice, weaker than the others but still firm. "You can't just make decisions like this without him." "It's not his house," Dad responded sharply. "His name's not on the lease alone, and he's not contributing nearly what he should given what he makes." I froze, unable to process what I was hearing. Not contributing enough? I paid twice what they did for rent, covered all utilities, and managed Mom's medical expenses that far exceeded what they imagined. He pays 2/3 of the rent, Mom pointed out, echoing my thoughts. And makes 4 times what I do, Dad countered. He should be covering more. Besides, we're cramped here. With him gone, we can reorganize. Maybe convert his office into a proper space for your medical equipment. The realization hit me like ice water. They were planning to ask me to move out, to leave the house I had found, secured, and primarily paid for. Not just ask, from the sound of it, but demand. I found these bank statements in his desk, Paige said, and I heard the rustle of papers. My privacy violated. My personal documents rifled through while I was at work. Look at his savings account. And this investment portfolio. He's sitting on all this money while we struggle. That's his emergency fund, Mom protested weakly. And some of that goes to my treatments. Please, Beatrice, Dad scoffed. The insurance covers most of it. He might throw in for a copay here and there, but he's not breaking the bank. If the situation weren't so painful, I might have laughed at how profoundly wrong he was. The insurance covered barely 30% of Mom's specialized treatments. The medications alone ran over $2,000 monthly after insurance. The rest, physical therapy, home care assistance when needed, medical equipment, adaptive devices, nutritional supplements, specialized transportation to distant specialists, all came from my emergency fund that Paige was now holding evidence of without understanding its purpose. I've already talked to the landlord, Dad continued. He's amenable to revising the lease if Pascal moves out. We'd have to cover the difference in rent for a while, but it's manageable if we cut back on some extras. What extras? Mom asked, her voice thin with stress. My medications? Don't be dramatic, Dad dismissed her concern. We'll figure it out. The point is, Pascal's presence is creating tension in this house. He looks down on us. He makes us feel like charity cases in our own home. So we're taking a vote, Paige announced with the self-importance that had characterized her since childhood. All in favor of asking Pascal to find his own place by Friday. Raise your hand. I couldn't see into the room, but the silence that followed told me both Dad and Paige had their hands up. Beatrice? Dad prompted after a moment. This isn't right, Mom said quietly. He's your son, Marcus. He's done nothing but help us. Your vote, Beatrice, Dad insisted, his tone leaving no room for debate. Another long pause then. I abstain. I won't vote my son out of his home. 2-0 with 1 abstention, Paige declared, sounding pleased with herself. The motion passes. Pascal moves out by Friday. He won't go easily, Mom warned. And what about my doctor appointments? My treatments? We can drive you, Dad said dismissively. Or use that medical transport service. The one Pascal pays for? Mom asked pointedly. We'll figure it out, he repeated, his standard response to problems he had no real solution for. I should have walked away then, processed what I'd heard, approached them rationally later. But something in me snapped, a dam of patience and understanding, finally giving way under years of pressure. I stepped into the doorway, making all 3 of them jump. Dad recovered first, his expression shifting from surprise to defensive anger. Paige clutched a folder to her chest, my personal financial documents visible inside. Mom simply looked devastated, tears welling in her tired eyes. Taking a vote about my living situation without me present, I said, my voice unnaturally calm even to my own ears. That seems appropriate. Pascal, Dad began, straightening his shoulders like he always did when preparing for confrontation. We were going to discuss this with you properly. When? After you'd already packed my things? Or just changed the locks while I was at work? Don't be dramatic, Paige cut in. This is a family discussion. A family discussion I wasn't invited to, I pointed out. About removing me from a house I found and primarily pay for. You've made your financial contributions very clear, Dad said coldly. Every chance you get. The injustice of his statement left me momentarily speechless. I had never once thrown my contributions in their faces, had gone out of my way to minimize discussions of who paid for what to avoid exactly this type of tension. Paige seized the moment to toss the folder onto the table, documents spilling out in a damning display. We know about your secret accounts, Pascal. All that money you're hoarding while we struggle to make ends meet. I stared at the papers, recognizing bank statements, investment reports, and automatic payment confirmations. 3 years of financial records that told only part of the story. The part that made me look selfish rather than selfless. You went through my desk, I stated flatly. You invaded my privacy and stole my documents. We have a right to know what resources are available to this family, Dad countered. You're living under this roof, part of this household. Not for much longer, apparently, I replied. The hurt transforming into something harder and colder, since you've already voted me out. It's for the best, Paige said with false sympathy. You clearly want your independence. Now you can have it, without us holding you back. Mom finally spoke, her voice small but determined. I didn't vote for this, Pascal. I would never. I know, Mom, I said gently. The only one who truly understood what I had been doing all this time, and she was too ill to stand up to Dad and Paige when they were like this. Looking at the three of them, I realized with painful clarity that this family dynamic was beyond repair. The rot went too deep, the patterns too established. No amount of money, sacrifice, or explanation would change how Dad and Paige saw me. Friday it is, then, I said finally. I'll be gone by Friday. I turned to leave, but Paige's voice stopped me. And Mom's medical costs, she called after me. We'll need all the information about what needs to be paid, since you've been handling it. I didn't turn around. You'll have everything you need to know. As I walked to my room, I heard Mom's soft sobs behind me, and for the first time, I didn't go back to comfort her. There was no comfort left to give. That night at dinner, the tension was thick enough to choke on. We sat around the dining table in silence, the only sounds the scrape of forks against plates, and Mom's occasional labored breathing. Dad and Paige exchanged glances, clearly waiting for me to bring up the earlier confrontation. I ate methodically, giving them nothing. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. About the discussion earlier. The vote to evict me? I clarified, my tone neutral. What about it? Paige flinched at my directness. That's a harsh way to put it. Is there a gentler term for kicking someone out of their home? Dad put down his fork with deliberate care. This isn't working, Pascal. The dynamic here. Your attitude. It's creating a toxic environment. My attitude, I repeated slowly. Interesting perspective. See, that's exactly it, Paige jumped in. That condescending tone, like you're so much better than us. I looked at Mom, who hadn't touched her food, her face drawn with stress that she couldn't afford health-wise. This confrontation wasn't good for her, but neither was continuing the charade we'd been living. I have a question, I said, my decision made. How much do you think Mom's medical care costs each month? Dad blinked, thrown by the apparent change of subject. What does that have to do with anything? Humor me. Give me a number. He shrugged uncomfortably. I don't know. A few hundred for medications after insurance? Maybe 1,000 total with the specialists? Paige? I prompted. Probably around the same, she said dismissively. The insurance covers 80%. I took a deep breath, then spoke clearly and deliberately. Mom's specialized medication costs $2,400 per month after insurance. Her physical therapy is another $800. The home health aide who comes when you're both too busy is $600. Medical transport to the specialists in Boston, $700. Adaptive equipment rental, $350. Nutritional supplements specifically formulated for her condition, $280. Special dietary needs, roughly $400. The monthly total averages $5,600 at minimum. Their faces registered shock, then disbelief. That's impossible, Dad sputtered. The insurance would cover more. We'd have been notified. You were notified, I corrected him. The bills came here. I intercepted them and set up automatic payments from my backup account. The account you found statements for, Paige, and assumed was me hoarding money while you struggled. Paige's face flushed. "You're making this up to make yourself look good." Without breaking eye contact, I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and slid it across the table. "See for yourself. 3 years of transactions, categorized by purpose. Every payment to every provider, every pharmacy, every specialist, every service." Dad picked up the phone with trembling hands, his face paling as he scrolled through the transaction history. Paige leaned over his shoulder, her expression shifting from skepticism to shock. "This can't be right," she whispered. "Mom's condition isn't this serious. We would know." "Would you?" I challenged. "When was the last time either of you attended a doctor's appointment with her? When did you last pick up her prescriptions, or talk to her specialists, or help her with her exercises?" Mom reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. "They didn't know, Pascal. I asked you not to tell them everything. I didn't want them to worry." "Wait," Dad interjected, looking between us. "You knew he was paying all this? You kept this from me?" "I knew he was helping more than you realized," Mom admitted. "I didn't know the exact amounts until recently. But yes, Pascal has been managing everything, financially and logistically. Without him, I don't know what would have happened to me." Dad set the phone down, his confidence visibly shaken. "Why didn't you tell us it was this bad? Why take this on alone? Would it have made a difference?" I asked honestly. "Would knowing have changed how you treated me, how quickly you decided I was the problem in this house?" "You should have been transparent," Paige insisted, though her voice lacked its earlier certainty. "We're family. These decisions should be made together." "Like the decision to kick me out?" I countered. "Was that made together?" "That's different," she muttered. "How? How is it different, Paige? Explain to me how voting to remove me from this home, without my input, is more acceptable than me quietly ensuring Mom gets the care she needs, without burdening everyone with financial stress." She had no answer for that. Mom squeezed my hand tighter. "I think it's time they knew everything, Pascal." I looked at her, surprised. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "They need to understand what they're really asking when they tell you to leave." Taking another deep breath, I continued. "Mom's condition is progressive. The current treatments are managing symptoms, but her kidneys are functioning at less than 40% capacity. Within a year, she'll likely need dialysis 3 times weekly. Within 2 years, she may need a transplant." Dad's face crumpled, age lines deepening as the reality of his wife's condition finally hit him. "Beatrice, why didn't you tell me?" "Because you were already stressed about money," she said gently. "Because Pascal offered to handle it, and I knew he could. Because I didn't want our last years together overshadowed by financial panic." "But the cost," Dad stammered. "We can't possibly afford this without." He trailed off, the implication clear. "They couldn't afford it without me. That's why I set up the automatic payments," I explained. "So you wouldn't have to worry about it. So Mom could focus on her health instead of finances. So we could live as normally as possible despite everything." Paige, never one to concede defeat easily, rallied. "This doesn't change the fact that you look down on us, that you treat us like we're beneath you." "I have never," I said, each word precise and measured, "looked down on either of you. I have bent over backwards to preserve your dignity while keeping this family afloat. I have silently absorbed every criticism, every dismissal, every ungrateful comment, because I thought that's what family does." "So why didn't you say something at Dad's birthday?" she challenged. "Why let him think you only gave him a cheap gift card if you're doing so much behind the scenes?" "Because it wasn't about the money," I said, frustrated that they still didn't understand. "The gift card was about reconnecting, about reminding him of a time when our relationship wasn't defined by financial pressures. It was an invitation to rebuild something we've lost." "A $200 invitation," Dad muttered, though his voice lacked the earlier disdain. "An invitation you rejected without even reading the note," I reminded him. "Just like you've rejected every other attempt I've made to be more than just a checkbook to this family." A heavy silence fell over the table. The confrontation had reached its peak, leaving all of us raw and uncertain of where to go next. Finally, Paige spoke, her voice uncharacteristically small. So what now? You're just going to cut Mom off because we hurt your feelings? The question revealed how little she understood me, even after all this time. I would never abandon Mom's care, regardless of how either of you treat me. But the vote stands, doesn't it? You want me out by Friday? Dad and Paige exchanged uncomfortable glances. Maybe we were hasty, Dad began. No, I interrupted firmly. You were very clear. The family has voted. I'll respect the decision. Pascal, Mom pleaded. Don't do this. It's already done, Mom, I said gently. They made their choice, and now I'm making mine. I stood up from the table, leaving my dinner half-eaten. I'll be out by Friday as requested. And don't worry. I'll make sure you have all the information you need about Mom's care going forward. As I walked away, I heard Paige hiss to Dad. Now what are we supposed to do? His response was too quiet to hear, but it didn't matter. For the first time in years, their problems were not mine to solve. Back in my room, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop, a strange calm settling over me. The confrontation had been painful, but clarifying. For years, I'd been pouring energy and resources into a bottomless pit of need and ingratitude. It was time to recalibrate. I started by creating a comprehensive spreadsheet of all Mom's medical expenses, providers, account numbers, payment schedules, and contact information. This would be my parting gift to Dad and Paige, a roadmap to the responsibility they were so eager to assume. Next to each item, I calculated what percentage of their respective incomes would be required to cover the costs. The numbers were sobering, especially for Paige, whose entry-level marketing salary would be decimated by even a fraction of Mom's needs. Next, I drafted an email to our landlord, Andrew Kellerman. He and I had developed a good relationship over the past 3 years, particularly after I personally paid for several property improvements that technically should have been his responsibility. I explained the situation honestly, that I would be moving out due to family conflicts, but that I was concerned about my mother's well-being. I requested information about breaking my portion of the lease and asked for his discretion until I had secured new accommodations. His response came within the hour, expressing concern and offering a vacant one-bedroom unit in another of his properties across town. The rent was reasonable, the location convenient to my office, and most importantly, he assured me I could move in immediately. Sometimes kindness does get repaid in kind. With housing secured, I moved on to financial disentanglement. I froze the joint household account I had established for rent and utilities, transferring exactly my portion of the current month's expenses before closing it completely. I contacted every service provider for Mom's medical care, updating billing information to route through her health insurance first, then to a new dedicated account I would maintain but that neither Dad nor Paige would have access to. I was removing myself from the equation while ensuring Mom wouldn't suffer for it. As I worked methodically through these tasks, a notification popped up from my bank's fraud detection service. Someone was attempting to access my main savings account using my credentials. The IP address traced back to our home network. A quick check of active devices showed Paige's laptop was currently connected. She was trying to get into my accounts before I could lock her out. The betrayal stung, but didn't surprise me. I immediately called the bank's security line, reported the attempted intrusion, and requested enhanced protection measures across all my accounts. The representative, hearing the strain in my voice, also suggested a complete audit of recent account activity to ensure nothing had already been compromised. Sir, I'm seeing several large withdrawals from your checking account over the past 3 months to a casino in Atlantic City, she informed me. They match your typical transaction pattern for regular vendors, but the payee is different. Would you like us to flag these as fraudulent? My blood ran cold. I hadn't made any such transactions. What's the name on the receiving end? The payee is listed as Golden Palace Casino and Resort, but the account appears to be under the name Marcus Montgomery, Dad. Using my account information to fund gambling trips disguised as medical payments, the pieces suddenly clicked into place. his recent fishing weekends with old buddies. The new designer watch, he claimed, was a gift from a grateful client. The increasing desperation to access my finances, even as he criticized me for having them. "How much in total?" I asked, dreading the answer. "Just over $27,000 across 15 transactions, sir." The amount was staggering, representing nearly 6 months of Mom's medical care. Money that could have eased our collective burden, squandered at gaming tables while he complained about my $200 gift card. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. "I'd like to dispute these charges," I said firmly, "and I need all documentation you can provide." After finishing with the bank, I continued my methodical separation, each discovery of financial entanglement reinforcing my decision. By midnight, I had compiled a complete dossier of information. Mom's medical details, Dad's secret gambling, Paige's attempted account access, rental agreements, utility records, and a detailed accounting of my contributions to the household over the past 3 years. I printed everything, organized it meticulously in a large manila envelope, and marked it confidential in bold red letters. This would be my parting statement, my evidence that the narrative they had constructed about me was not just wrong, but maliciously inverted. As I prepared for bed, physically and emotionally exhausted, my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "They're still arguing downstairs. Your father is panicking about the finances. Paige is blaming him for pushing you away. I'm worried about what happens next. Please don't leave us entirely, Pascal. I understand why you need to go, but I still need you. Not just for the money. For you." I stared at her message for a long time before responding. "I'll always be there for you, Mom. That won't change. But the relationship with Dad and Paige has to change. Get some rest. Everything will look different in the morning." Truer words were never spoken, though not in the way any of us expected. I woke early the next morning to the sound of raised voices downstairs. Checking my phone, I saw a flurry of notifications. 6 missed calls from Dad, 4 from Paige, 3 voicemails, and multiple text messages ranging from confused to frantic to angry. The financial reality I had engineered overnight was already making itself felt. I dressed quickly in a crisp button-down shirt and slacks, preparing for a day that would require professional composure. The confrontation waiting downstairs wasn't one I was looking forward to, but it was necessary for the clean break I needed. When I entered the kitchen, Dad and Paige were huddled over a laptop, faces drawn with stress. They looked up when I appeared, expressions cycling rapidly through surprise, anger, and finally, calculation. "Morning," I said neutrally, pouring myself a cup of coffee as if it were any ordinary day. "What did you do?" Dad demanded without preamble. "The rent account is frozen. The utilities are showing past due. Your mother's pharmacy just called saying the automatic payment was declined." I took a deliberate sip of coffee before answering. "I've separated my finances from the household, as per the family vote yesterday. I've paid my portion of this month's expenses, but going forward, you'll need to manage your own accounts." "This is vindictive and you know it," Paige snapped. "You can't just pull the rug out from under us without warning." "Warning?" I raised an eyebrow. "Like the warning you gave me about needing to move out by tomorrow? Or the warning before you went through my desk and financial records? That kind of warning?" Dad's face flushed with anger. "This isn't about us. This is about your mother's care." "Mom's care is fully arranged," I assured him. "I've updated all her providers with new payment information. Her medications and treatments will continue uninterrupted. What's changed is your access to my accounts and your ability to use Mom's situation as leverage." "What's that supposed to mean?" Dad demanded. "It means I know about the casino withdrawals, Dad. $27,000 over the past 3 months, disguised as medical payments, but actually funding your gambling habit." The color drained from his face. Beside him, Paige's eyes widened in shock. "That's a lie," he stammered, but there was no conviction in his voice. "The bank has provided complete documentation," I continued calmly. "They're investigating it as potential fraud, but I suspect you had access to my account information through Mom's medical paperwork. Very clever, routing the payments to match legitimate medical vendors in amount and frequency. Dad? Paige turned to him, confused and horrified. What is he talking about? Dad seemed to physically shrink before our eyes, his bluster evaporating. It got out of hand, he admitted quietly. I was trying to win enough to help with the bills, to not be such a burden on everyone. But it spiraled. And instead of winning, you lost nearly 6 months' worth of Mom's care, I stated flatly. Paige sat heavily in a kitchen chair, her worldview visibly crumbling. So all this time, while you were criticizing Pascal for not doing enough, you were stealing from him? From Mom's medical fund? Dad couldn't meet her eyes. I was going to pay it back. I had a system, a sure thing. There's no such thing as a sure thing in gambling, I said. As I'm sure you've discovered $27,000 later. The doorbell rang, interrupting the tense exchange. I checked my watch, right on schedule. That's probably Andrew Kellerman, the landlord, I informed them. I let him know I'd be moving out due to family circumstances. Since my name is primary on the lease, he'll need to discuss options with all of us. The panic that crossed their faces was almost satisfying, but I took no real pleasure in it. This wasn't about revenge. It was about consequences and clarity. Dad went to answer the door while Paige turned on me, her voice low and urgent. You can't do this, Pascal. Where are we supposed to go? How can we afford this place without you? That's a question you should have considered before voting me out, I replied simply. But don't worry. I've prepared a complete breakdown of household expenses and Mom's medical costs, with suggestions for how you and Dad can manage them on your combined incomes. It will require sacrifices, of course. No more designer clothes for you, no more fishing trips for him. But it's doable if you're committed. Dad returned with Andrew, whose professional demeanor couldn't quite hide his discomfort at being thrust into our family drama. Mr. Montgomery. Andrew nodded to me. I've brought the paperwork we discussed, and I wanted to check in personally given the situation. Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate your flexibility. He turned to Dad and Paige. As Pascal has informed you, he's terminating his portion of the lease. Since his name is primary on the agreement, this creates several options for the rest of you. Dad swallowed hard. What options exactly? Andrew laid out the possibilities clinically. They could remain in the house if they could qualify financially for the full rent on their own. They could find a roommate to replace me, subject to background and credit checks, or they could terminate the lease entirely and relocate, with an expedited timeline given the circumstances. As the implications sank in, Mom appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking pale and tired after a night of little sleep. What's happening? She asked, her voice small and confused. Pascal, why is Andrew here? I went to her side, supporting her gently to a chair. I'm moving out today, Mom. Remember we talked about this yesterday? The family vote? She looked bewildered. But so soon? I thought we'd have time to figure something out. It's better this way, I said softly. A clean break. But I've already found a place nearby, and I'll still take you to your appointments. Nothing changes with your care. Everything changes, she whispered, tears welling. Our family changes. I couldn't argue with that. Our family had already changed, long before today's events. This was just making the fractures visible. After Andrew left with signed paperwork, promising to send formal options to Dad and Paige by the afternoon, an uneasy silence fell over the kitchen. The initial anger had given way to a stunned reckoning with reality. So that's it? Paige finally asked. You're just walking away from us? I'm respecting the family's decision, I corrected her, and establishing appropriate boundaries going forward. What about Mom? Dad pressed. What about her needs? As I've said repeatedly, Mom's care is arranged. The payments will continue from my separate account. The only difference is, you won't have access to those funds for other purposes. Mom reached for my hand. Where will you go, Pascal? Andrew has a 1-bedroom available in his Riverside property. It's close to work, and only 15 minutes from here. I'll be moving my things today while you're at physical therapy. So sudden, she murmured. It's for the best, Mom. A clean break, a fresh start for everyone. Dad cleared his throat, attempting to regain some authority. And what about us? What are we supposed to do now? I reached into my briefcase and removed the manila envelope marked confidential. This contains everything you need to know, I said, placing it on the table. Mom's medical information, household expenses, your options for moving forward financially. I've also included documentation of the casino withdrawals, in case you need a reminder of how we reached this point. Dad stared at the envelope as if it might burn him. You've thought of everything, haven't you? I've had to, I replied simply. Someone had to think beyond the moment, beyond emotions and pride and appearances. Paige, never one to accept defeat gracefully, made one last attempt. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Making us beg, making us suffer, proving how much we need you. I looked at her thoughtfully. No, Paige, I don't enjoy any of this. What I wanted was appreciation, not dependency. Respect, not fear. Family, not tenants. But we can't always get what we want, can we? I turned to Mom, who was silently crying, and knelt beside her chair. I'll pick you up for physical therapy at 2, just like always. Nothing changes there, I promise. She nodded, unable to speak through her tears. With nothing left to say, I gathered my things and headed for the door. Behind me, I heard the rustle of paper as someone finally opened the envelope, followed by a sharp intake of breath as its contents were revealed. The truth, laid bare in black and white, would have to speak for me now. The one-bedroom apartment in Riverside felt both liberating and lonely in those first weeks. After years of orienting my life around my family's needs, the sudden absence of that responsibility left an emptiness I hadn't anticipated. The space was mine alone, quiet in the mornings, silent in the evenings, with no one scheduled to accommodate but my own. I kept my promise to Mom, driving her to appointments, staying for her treatments, ensuring her care continued seamlessly despite the upheaval. During those drives, we talked more openly than we had in years, free from Dad's dominating presence and Paige's cutting interruptions. I should have stood up for you more, Mom confessed during one such drive, 3 weeks after I'd moved out. I let them treat you as an ATM rather than a son. I was so focused on not being a burden that I failed to see the burden they were placing on you. You were sick, Mom. You still are. Your job was to focus on getting better, not managing family dynamics. She shook her head. Being ill doesn't absolve me of responsibility to see the truth. I watched them take and take from you while giving nothing back, and I said nothing because it was easier. Because it kept the peace. Because I was afraid of losing their support if I sided with you openly. Her honesty was refreshing, painful as it was to hear. What about now? How are things at the house? She sighed, looking out the window at the passing neighborhoods. Tense. Your father is meeting with a gambling counselor, part of the agreement with the bank to not press charges for the unauthorized withdrawals. Paige is working overtime, trying to cover more of the rent. The reality of finances without you has been clarifying for them both. I nodded, feeling no satisfaction from their struggles, only a sad vindication. And the medical bills? Is everything being covered? Yes, just as you arranged. The providers all confirmed the new payment system. I don't know how to thank you for continuing to handle that, Pascal. After everything that happened, you don't need to thank me, Mom. I'm not doing it to prove a point or to hold leverage. I'm doing it because I love you, and because your health matters to me more than pride or petty victories. She reached across the console and squeezed my hand. That's why you're different from them. You give without keeping score. You love without conditions. It's a rare quality, one I wish I'd acknowledged more when you were still at home. Home. The word felt strange now, disconnected from any physical location. My apartment wasn't quite home yet, more of a way station between what was and what would be. And the house where my family remained no longer felt like my space, though I still had keys and technically could enter any time. As weeks turned to months, subtle shifts occurred in our fractured family dynamic. Dad, faced with the stark reality of his gambling addiction and its consequences, began attending regular support meetings beyond the mandated counseling. The humbling process of recovery seemed to soften some of his harsher edges, though our relationship remained cautious and limited primarily to logistics around Mom's care. Paige underwent her own transformation, albeit more reluctantly. The financial pressure forced her to mature in ways she'd avoided for years. She took on a second part-time job, scaled back her luxury spending, and gradually, almost imperceptibly, began treating me with something approaching respect during our occasional interactions. 6 months after moving out, I received an unexpected text from Dad. "Can we meet? Just the two of us. Coffee or something. There are things I need to say." We met at a neutral location, a quiet cafe downtown where neither of us had any history. He looked older, the months of stress and reckoning evident in the new lines around his eyes, the gray that had overtaken his temples. But there was something else too, a humility that hadn't been there before. "I'm in step 9, he said, after we'd settled with our drinks. "Making amends to those I've harmed. You're at the top of that list, Pascal." I nodded, giving him space to continue without making it easier. He'd earned this discomfort. "I was jealous of you," he admitted, staring into his coffee. "Your success, your stability, the respect you commanded so effortlessly, while I struggled all my life for scraps of recognition. It was easier to tear you down than to acknowledge that my son had surpassed me in every way that mattered." The honesty was startling after years of defensive posturing. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I need to acknowledge the harm I caused. The money I took, yes, but more than that, the years of belittling your contributions, dismissing your feelings, treating you like a resource instead of a son. I was wrong, Pascal. Profoundly, inexcusably wrong." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was more accountability than I'd ever expected from him. "What do you want from me now?" He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "Nothing. That's the point of this step. It's not about getting forgiveness or rebuilding relationships on my terms. It's about owning my actions without expectations. You don't owe me another chance. You don't owe me forgiveness. I just owe you the truth." We talked for nearly 2 hours, laying bare years of misunderstandings, resentments, and missed connections. It wasn't healing exactly, but it was honest in a way our relationship had never been. When we parted, nothing was resolved, but something had shifted, a door left slightly ajar that had previously been sealed shut. Paige took longer to reach out, her pride more entrenched, her identity more wrapped up in our dysfunctional dynamic. When she finally texted asking to meet, nearly 8 months had passed since I'd moved out. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted, as we sat across from each other in a park near her office. "I'm not good at admitting I was wrong. I've noticed," I said, allowing a small smile to soften the words. She rolled her eyes, a flash of the old Paige, but then grew serious again. "I've been seeing a therapist. Dad's recovery process inspired it, actually. She's helping me understand why I was so quick to see you as the enemy, rather than the support system you actually were." "And why was that?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Competition. Insecurity. Dad always compared us, always held you up as the responsible one, the successful one. I could never measure up, so I decided you were the problem instead of my own choices. It was easier to resent you than to change myself." The insight surprised me. "I never knew you felt that way. I always thought Dad favored you." She laughed, a short, sharp sound without humor. "That's the thing about perception. We were both wrong. Dad was playing us against each other because it gave him control. Mom was right about that, once she started standing up for herself after you left." "Mom stood up to Dad?" This was news to me, a development I hadn't witnessed in our limited interactions. In her quiet way, yes. She stopped making excuses for him, stopped smoothing things over. She told him, if he didn't get help for the gambling, she'd move in with you, regardless of how cramped your place is. That was the real turning point for him, I think. The thought of Mom finding her voice, setting her own boundaries, filled me with unexpected pride. Perhaps something good had come from all this pain after all. As I continued to rebuild my life independent of my family's demands, I discovered parts of myself that had been submerged beneath responsibility and obligation. I joined a local rock climbing gym, rekindled friendships that had fallen by the wayside, even started dating again, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. Alice, a software engineer I met through a mutual friend, became a steady presence in my life. Her straightforward nature and healthy family dynamics, a refreshing contrast to what I'd known. She asked questions about my family situation without judgment, listened to my stories with empathy rather than advice, and demonstrated what love without scorekeeping could look like. A year after moving out, I hosted Thanksgiving dinner in my new, larger apartment. Mom was well enough to attend. Her condition stabilized through a new treatment protocol. Dad came, sober and subdued, but present in a way he hadn't been for years. Paige brought her new boyfriend, a kind social worker who seemed to balance her sharper edges. Alice prepared side dishes in my kitchen, as if she'd always belonged there. It wasn't perfect. Conversations sometimes stalled. Old tensions occasionally flickered beneath the surface. But we were trying. Each of us bringing our flawed selves to the table. Each of us making an effort to see beyond our own perspectives. As we sat around my dining table, I realized that the most expensive gift I'd ever given my family wasn't financial at all. It was the uncomfortable truth, the removal of my enabling presence, the space for them to face their own choices without my safety net. By walking away, I'd given them the opportunity to become better versions of themselves, just as I had become a better version of myself by establishing boundaries. The $200 gift card that had sparked this journey sat framed on my wall, a reminder of how a small moment can catalyze profound change when it exposes truths we've been avoiding. Beside it hung a simple photo of Lake Champlain at sunset, the fishing spot where Dad and I had once connected authentically before money and resentment complicated everything. Perhaps someday we'd return there, cast our lines into the quiet water, and talk as equals, neither savior nor burden, just father and son navigating the current together. Until then, I would continue building a life defined not by what I provided to others, but by what I valued for myself. The truest family, I'd learned, isn't always the one you're born into. Sometimes it's the one you choose. The one you build relationship by relationship, boundary by boundary, truth by difficult truth. And sometimes, the most profound act of love is simply the courage to walk away when staying would destroy both them and you. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with someone you love? How did it change your relationship? I'd love to read your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to my channel for more real-life experiences and lessons learned the hard way. Remember that your worth isn't measured by what you give to others, but by how authentically you live your truth. Thank you for listening, and may you find the courage to honor yourself while still loving those who may not always deserve it.